At the end of a quiet suburban lane stood a pale yellow house, its paint fading under years of sunlight and memories. It was the kind of house where the curtains were always half drawn, where laughter once lived but had long been replaced by silence. Inside, the faint scent of lavender still lingered. The scent that had always surrounded Evelyn Carter, known simply as Grandma to those who had once filled her home with noise and warmth. Evelyn was 79 now. Her hair had turned the color of the first winter frost, her hands frail but steady, her eyes still bright with the echoes of a life well lived. For 48 years, she had worn the same gold wedding ring, a symbol of her love for Henry, her husband, her partner, her best friend. Together, they had built everything that stood inside those four walls. But time had changed more than her face. After Henry's passing, the visits from her family grew less frequent. Birthdays were replaced by text messages, holidays by excuses, and eventually, the house that once overflowed with love became nothing more than a memory of what used to be. Her son Richard rarely called, too caught up in business and money. Her daughter-in-law Marlene treated Evelyn's home as a burden, an outdated piece of property sitting on land worth more than its owner. The grandchildren, though kind in passing, had grown into strangers who spoke more to their phones than to her heart. Evelyn noticed every absence, every silence. But she never complained. Instead, she found comfort in her garden, her rocking chair, and the ring on her finger. That small circle of gold reminded her of promises kept, of days when love was stronger than pride. But that peace was broken one afternoon when her family arrived without warning. Their words were polite, their smiles rehearsed, but Evelyn saw through it all. They spoke about helping her downsize, about better living conditions, about making life easier. But beneath the kindness, she heard what they didn't say, that they wanted to sell her home. They talked about real estate values, about how much the land was worth, and about how retirement communities were more practical. Evelyn sat quietly, her heart sinking with every word. The house that held her husband's laughter, the walls that echoed with her children's first steps, they wanted to turn it all into cash. That night, when they left, Evelyn sat alone in the dark, staring at her hand. The ring still gleamed faintly under the lamplight. She remembered Henry's words, long ago, about never letting the world take away what truly mattered. And as she looked around her empty living room, Evelyn made a decision that would change everything. It was time for her family to remember what truly mattered. But they would only understand it when it was too late. That night, under the quiet hum of the clock, Grandma took off her old wedding ring for the first time in nearly 5 decades. The morning was soft, painted in shades of gray and gold as Evelyn locked her front door and began her walk down Maple Lane. The ring sat in a small velvet pouch in her coat pocket, light yet heavy with meaning. She passed familiar houses, empty driveways, and neighbors who no longer waved. The world had moved on, but she hadn't. At the corner of Elm Street stood a small pawn shop, dusty, quiet, forgotten, much like her. Its sign flickered weakly in the morning light, and behind the counter sat a man surrounded by relics of other people's lives. Watches, trinkets, and wedding bands left behind by time. Evelyn stepped inside, feeling a strange calmness wash over her. She had come to part with the one thing that tied her to the past, not because she didn't love Henry anymore, but because she wanted that love to mean something again. The ring had been a symbol of promise. Now, it would become a symbol of purpose. She handed the ring over, and the man weighed it gently before writing down a number. Evelyn didn't care about the value. To her it wasn't about money, it was about transformation. She took the envelope he offered, folded it neatly into her purse, and walked out into the sunlight. On her way home, she stopped at the community center. It was old and nearly abandoned, much like her neighborhood. The local children had no safe place to play. The elderly had nowhere to gather. Evelyn saw possibility where others saw decay. That afternoon, she called a few old friends, widows like herself, forgotten by their families but not by their hearts. They gathered around her kitchen table, drinking tea and sharing stories, and together they made plans. Evelyn used the money from the ring to start something new. A small community garden behind the center, a place where people could grow flowers, vegetables, and friendships. For weeks, she worked in secret. The sound of her shovel, the scent of soil, the laughter of children who began helping her. It all filled the silence that had haunted her home. The garden began to bloom, and with it, Evelyn bloomed again. But word spread fast. When Richard found out about the money, the ring, and the garden, his outrage was swift. To him it was a waste. To Marlene, it was proof that Evelyn had lost her mind. They didn't see beauty. They saw profit slipping away. Evelyn watched their anger with the same quiet strength she had always shown. She knew they didn't understand, not yet. But the day would come when they would. When Evelyn's family returned to confront her, the garden behind the community center was in full bloom. Roses, tulips, and sunflowers danced in the breeze, and children ran through rows of plants that had sprung to life under her care. But her family didn't see the beauty. They saw betrayal. They accused her of wasting her money, of being reckless, of not thinking about the family's future. Evelyn listened without response. In her silence, they saw defiance. To them, the ring was just gold. To her, it was love reborn, and that difference would become their undoing. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew. Marlene began pushing harder to sell Evelyn's house. Richard, caught between guilt and greed, started gathering papers, transfer documents, legal requests, property assessments. Evelyn said nothing. But late one night, after they left in frustration, she opened her old trunk and took out a folder. Inside were the original deeds, signed not only by her husband but also by herself, granting her full ownership of the land. The house wasn't theirs to sell. It never had been. Still, she didn't tell them. She let them continue, letting their greed reveal who they had become. The more they demanded, the less they saw what she was trying to teach them. When the notice for property sale came in the mail, Evelyn smiled softly. They had gone too far. It was time to let them face what they had become, and to learn, finally, what love truly costs. The house was silent on the morning of the sale. Papers were signed, agents were called, and Richard's voice echoed through the empty halls, boasting of how much money they would make. Evelyn stood by the window, her hands folded neatly, her heart calm. But when the lawyer arrived, he carried an envelope sealed in gold wax, her name printed neatly on the front. He explained that Evelyn had already made arrangements weeks earlier. The property, it turned out, was no longer in her name. She had quietly donated it, the land, the house, and its garden, to the town's community trust, to be turned into a public sanctuary for seniors and children. The documents were legal and final. Richard's plans collapsed in an instant. The sale was void. The house was gone. As he stormed out in disbelief, Evelyn looked at the garden beyond the window, glowing under the morning sun. She felt no sadness. For the first time in years, she felt free. Weeks later, when the first plaque was installed at the new Carter Community Garden, people from the neighborhood gathered to honor Evelyn's gift. Her name was etched in brass, not as a property owner, but as a giver, a dreamer, a reminder of what love can build even in silence. Her family stood among the crowd, ashamed yet deeply moved. For the first time, they understood. The ring wasn't sold out of desperation, but to give life back to something meaningful. The symbol of her love for Henry had become a symbol of love for everyone. Tears replaced anger. Guilt turned to reflection. Evelyn, seated among children planting flowers, felt Henry's presence in the wind, as if he was whispering his pride from somewhere beyond. Evelyn passed quietly one spring morning, surrounded not by wealth, but by peace. In her will, she left nothing of monetary value, only letters. Each one was written with care, her handwriting steady, her words gentle. To her son, she wrote about forgiveness. To her daughter-in-law, about kindness. And to her grandchildren, she left a simple reminder that love isn't measured by what we keep, but by what we give away. In the final letter, she mentioned the ring, the one she sold, and explained what she had done with it. That ring, she wrote, was not the end of love. It was its beginning again. As her family visited the garden months later, they saw new flowers blooming, roses planted by neighbors, lilies tended by children. In the center stood a small statue of intertwined hands, engraved with a single line. The truest treasures are those that cannot be sold. And so the legacy of Grandma Evelyn Carter lived on. Not in gold, not in land, but in every life she had quietly touched.